Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we are in the midst of one of these little things that we love to do, a little series, and we're talking about one of our favorite psychologists, Carl Jung. And, for me, Daniel, he's one of my favorite ones to talk about because he is so obviously psycho-spiritually interested, probably as much or more so than any like major psychological figure. So that's been a fun subject matter for us. We're doing a deep dive into a lot of his concepts. And we've been using different sources for this. There's a Bernardo Kastrup, who's been kind of referencing here and there, who's sort of a major philosophy of consciousness guy who talks about Jung. We've been looking a little bit at Jung's The Red books. And so this is our kind of like spending some time with Carl Jung
Hmm.
episodes. And we've been doing something on this, one of his ideas called a daimon, not a demon, a daimon, Daimon, which is this idea that everyone has like an kind of an inner archetypal spirit guide that becomes sort of a force in their life. And we got to the point where we want to talk about how this compares to like one of the big Tibetan Buddhist ideas, which is the idea of a yiddam. We're going to try to kick that around a little bit. We're going to freestyle it a little bit because it's a deep subject matter, and we'll explore it as best we can. And that's kind of our notion here. So, okay, but before we get to the good stuff, I'm going to do the usuals, which is if you can do the stuff that everyone asks you to do, every single podcast you ever listen to, which is to like or subscribe or share an episode or or write a review, that would be awesome. As we always say every week, this is a labor of love for us. We really care about all this spiritual stuff. And whatever you can do to maybe help get our material out to more people would be greatly appreciated. And we appreciate all of you for listening too. So thank you so much. All right. I don't know what the question of the week is. I guess it's kind of like, what is a yiddam? And what does a
Correct.
yiddam mean, sort of like psychologically? So, I was thinking about talking about this, and it's really funny because if you're a non-Tibetan person, you go to what would be called an empowerment. In the Tibetan, it's called a wong. It's like a little bit of like an initiation ritual into a practice. Daniel, we were talking off mic about the lack of rituals in the Western world, right? You were sort of like making that point. There's a bit of a hole with that, right? And this is sort of a Tibetan spiritual ritual that introduces you into doing whatever practice it is you're getting this initiatory ritual in. When you're in, like I said, though, when you're a non-Tibetan person, you go in and you have no idea what the fuck is going on at all. They do a lot of stuff in Tibetan. You're completely confused. You go through the ritual. It feels good, right? But you're also like, I have no idea what happened. So I thought maybe Daniel will talk a little bit about the stages in these empowerments to give people a feeling of what a yiddam is. Sound cool to you?
Yeah, I think before we do that though, just like we could talk about what a yiddam is, but to give just because people are going to hear that word, they're going to have no concept what that
Yeah.
word even means.
Yeah. So, you want to do it? You want me to do it?
No, you go for it, and then I'll.
Okay. So yiddam is like these meditation deities in Tibetan Buddhist practice. If you kind of look up Tibetan Buddhist art, you'll see all these different kind of images. And they're not just meant to be like paintings of the saints or something, the way you might think about it in Christian culture or something. They kind of carry a different role. They're things that you want to connect with in your spiritual practice, the way if you're a Catholic, you might want to connect to a saint or something. But it's
Hmm.
also the idea that you go through these rituals of like connecting with whatever the practice is that you're doing. And it could be a female figure like Tara is a really kind of famous one, right? And you can do a little
Hmm.
search of Tara if you're listening to us and see that. Or there's masculine figures. One of Daniel's and I favorites is Manjushri. He carries a sword that represents wisdom, the ability of the mind to cut through delusion. He has a book
Hmm.
in another hand. So there are those kinds of things. Some of them get more exotic if you do a little search, and there's one of the ones that's called Yamantaka. He has the head of a buffalo. So it has a little bit of shamanic feeling to it, power animal kind of a vibe going on. Big horns, sometimes all these arms with all these different weapons that represent power in the spiritual practice of the person who's doing the thing and the ability of them to overcome obstacles. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about with this, but you can do a little search and you can see some of the imagery. Some of them are kind of saucy. You'll have a lot of things that what they call a yabum, which is like a female and male couple together. It kind of has a little bit more of like, how do I use my sexual feelings, my erotic feelings, my romantic feelings in my practice?
Hmm.
So a lot of great stuff to look at. If you kind of do a little search for the Tibetan art, you can see these things. And what's interesting about them is they can be things that you connect to as spiritual energies in the world, But the more you go deep into the tantras, the idea is that you're supposed to embody that yidam yourself. In a certain sense, you're supposed to transform into psycho-spiritually into the feeling and the power of that meditation figure, right? So it takes on a
Hmm.
different role. You might be thinking about, well, I can connect to, the angel Gabriel or something. It's a little different because you're going to become the angel Gabriel in a way, right? It takes on a different
Hmm.
role the deeper you get into the tantras. Okay, so that's
Hmm.
kind of like my little short introduction to that. You got
Yeah,
something else
so
to do?
so the yiddam, so first of all, if you're listening to this podcast, the picture that we use for our image for the podcast itself is of Tara. So that's a way in which you have no idea if you can't find one. Like that's one, right? And Tara represents a number of different things, but healing and purification, something like this, amongst other things. But something like this. And so I'll give some of the they say that the Yiddam is a meditational deity that serves as a focus for meditation and spiritual practice, said to be the manifestations of the enlightened mind or of Buddhahood or something along those lines. And I like Eric, you make this point of like that these are not only symbols for you to connect with during meditation, or if you want to call it prayer, that's fine too. Like you mentioned Gabriel, but that you are also trying to emulate what it is that these characters are meaning, what they are intended to mean in reality. So much like all iconography and artwork, really, but iconography in particular, amongst basically every tradition, the pictures that are shared in the practices that they carry have meaning in them. So wings not only mean that like someone can fly, but they can travel between different worlds, between the spirit world and the earth plane.
Or they can
Um,
transcend the mundane or something, right? Depending on
sure.
when you interpret it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the point, is that there's multiple interpretations for one particular symbol, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. And out of those 1,000 words, multiple descriptions of that picture can be given. And the same thing can be said for these symbols. So there's various symbols that you can see in Tibetan Buddhist iconography, as well as Christian iconography, or Judaistic any iconography from any tradition will all have various symbols. I think for Eric and I, and for the history of this podcast, we have been talking about primarily the Tibetan Buddhist icons in this way because this is what we're most familiar with. This is what we spend a lot of our time teaching with on retreat. Not only us teaching, but then also us receiving teachings. And so these have a very familiar place with us because of our connection with them. And therefore, they're a strong source of inspiration in our life from the perspective of practice in terms of meditational focus. But then, and as Eric was saying, and I'll wrap up my point here, that we, as being good practitioners, are trying, sometimes with more or less success, but we're trying to emulate that which we are desiring to connect to. So, for example, if we're seeing Tara as a healing figure, right? She is the doctor or the nurse of the enlightened state. Then we are trying to feel what that feels like to connect with her, have her in our space physically, energetically, psychologically, and then trying to get up from the meditation cushion being the emanation of Tara. I am Tara. And maybe I don't want to, walk around feeling like I'm a sexy Asian lady, but that's not terrible feeling, I guess. But it's the energies that she is representing. It's the psychology that goes along with it, that she can transcend the mundane things and have infinite amount of skills and possibilities to help people with any possible situation. So it is a very empowering feeling. And in order to be able to work with these yiddams, to work with these beings, to work and understand with this iconography, you have to go to an empowerment ritual, which Eric will talk about right now.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting about it is, I like looked at ritual magic things too and done those kinds of things. When you get to like, you know, uh, Gabriel or Michael or Raphael or Uriel, you can kind of invoke those figures to become an influence in your life. You could say
Yes.
like, what would Jesus do and wear it around, on a necklace, right? You're trying to emulate the the positive qualities of a deep spiritual figure like that. The thing that's interesting about this is that, you're not maybe thinking like even you're going to become Kali. I'm not a Kali practitioner. Maybe people do feel that way. I don't know. But like the idea of the yiddam is that you're going to like become that yiddam. You're going to not only just emulate, you're going to transform. And you're supposed to kind of, again, I think from Jung, you'd say like creative imagination was one of his psychological techniques.
Yes.
This is a creative imagination technique. In my mind, I am the yiddam that I identify with, right? So I'm going to transform in that way my mind, my psyche, my spirit into that. I may be still walking around looking like Eric, but inside and also in the energies that inform my psyche, my spirit, I've transformed myself into the yidam that's the one that I identify with. And I'll probably even roll around in the world that way, right?
Mm,
So, I mean, that's quite interesting. And that's where you get the idea Tantra is the path of transformation. That has multiple
mm.
levels of meaning too. But, when you get a practice like this, it's the idea I'm going to transform myself into that figure. So I suppose if you were doing Tantra, if we were going to like create a tantric Christianity, I would become Jesus. People would feel that might be heretical,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yes.
But, that would be a tantric approach, right? And you can take that for wherever it's worth. I'm not trying to be heretical to people who have Christian beliefs or anything, but that would be the tantric attitude, right? The same way I'm going to become Shiva. I'm going to become that figure, right? That's maybe the Buddhist Tantra twist, which is if you're not familiar with it, is kind of different. If you never heard that before, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to become that thing. Yeah, that's the idea, right? And if you again, like a lot of the tantric things in India developed kind of counterculture, right? They were things that developed, as responses to other religious things, and they would incorporate things from the major religions, and they were obviously meant to be things that were helping people who maybe grew up as followers of other religious practices, and they do this twist, and the twist would be spirituality with a twist. The twist would be Jin and Tantra. The twist would be, okay, now you're actually going to imagine that you become Jesus, right? That's how strong your identity is with this figure. So, and not in a way of like belittling the power of that spiritual figure, but like I'm going to become that thing myself. I'm going to take on that thing of becoming that, right? So I have had the thought before, like if you had a movement like that, if you had a real tantric movement in the United States, you'd have to take the figures that people identify with, and you have to say, okay, now I'm going to become that thing. I've had that thought before, and maybe that brings it home on some level,
Yeah.
right?
No, I mean, yeah, you're empowering yourself with the I'm not going to say in a negative way, but the grandiosity of the
Well,
being, the being in
the
which you are,
yeah,
working with.
divine pride in appearance, they call it, right? In the
Yes.
tantras, I'm going to have the
Yes.
feeling, okay, I might be walking around like just Eric, but in my spirit, in my psyche, in my mind, I'm like, say, JC, right? And that's what I'm embodying. Or the one that I like, has a lot of like kind of Shiva Shakti kind of vibe to it. So, and it's pretty obvious that they were like, okay, well, you're going to become the divine figure now, right? And
Hmm.
that's a twist, especially what they call highest yoga tantra. The different levels of the tantras. Sometimes you're more connecting to the external spiritual figure. We're used to that, right? This is when you get to the what they call the higher levels of tantra. Now, no, I'm going to transform myself into that. And
And
again, I've wondered about it if we could ever get. I mean, again, it feels heretical. I don't know how it felt to the people back in India when these things were being developed, whether it felt heretical to them. I'm going to become Shiva. What are you talking about? But it's a bold position if you really think about it.
But Eric, it's also important for people to, who are listening to this, who are like, well, what does that mean? You're not only appearing as that being, you are acting as that being. You are performing as that being. You are feeling as that being. You are thinking as that being, or at least making the attempt to do so, so that it is not just it's not only a mask. It's not Halloween. It is taking on the nervous system of that being, taking on the mind process of that being, which in order to be able to do that, the practitioners are consistently and constantly familiarizing themselves with the state of being as that being. And so, in one sense, you are loosening the grip on your own particular self, on your own sense of self. As Lama Glenn so wonderfully puts it, temporary localized phenomenon, meaning you as Eric, me as Daniel, listener as yourself. You begin to loosen the chains, the knots, if you will, probably better said as knots. You loosen the knots of the individualized self, and then you can kind of morph yourself into this other being. And I forgot who it was who was talking, maybe Lama Yeshe, but I'm not quite sure because it's a pretty somatic view of things. And they were saying that you are upgrading your nervous system to be a greater source of sensitivity by taking on the nervous system of these deities. So it's not just like, what does it feel like to have two arms? No, what does it feel like to have four arms or eight or 32 or 16 or whatever, or legs, or how many faces? Do you know what I'm saying? Or to be two beings at once. How does it feel like to be bathed in passion or to be an
If you're doing one of those
emanation?
yam practices where you're imagining yourself as a couple
Y-
in embrace, like you're trying to
Yeah.
embody the feeling of both members of that couple. You might be identifying with one more than another, then depending on your object of attraction and how you identify, but you're also
Yeah.
trying to feel all of it.
Yes.
You're trying to feel all of it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so in this way, you're increasing your capacity to feel, period.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Which pushes your limits more and more and more. And I think, pushes your limits for everything. Pushes your limits for compassion, pushes your limits for intellect, pushes your limits for sensation. But it pushes your limits.
Yeah. And when they say nervous system, sometimes what they'll mean is like not just like the more gross level nervous system that
Yeah.
connects back to your brain. Sometimes they mean like the subtle nervous system, the part that you would
Hmm.
think of as being chakras and channels
Hmm.
in a yogic tradition. And there definitely are practices. Again, we're freestyling this episode just to like do a conversation. So we're flowing different things, but there are practices that I do, are my main ones that have to do with like transforming all of those different chakras and channels into divine images.
Hmm.
So if you take those as being equally real to the nervous system that connects back to your brain, then you say, well, this is just as real, chakras and channels, just as real as acupuncturists, as the acupuncture channels that flow through the body. We take all those things as being real. We'll take the chakras, we'll take that nervous system, and we'll transform that into all of this divine energy. So you're transforming that aspect of the nervous system too. And that's a tantric practice, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think that was, I mean, if we talk personal, that was very interesting. I really wanted to do those
Yeah.
as someone who came as a medical person, because we spend so much time dealing with like the physical body, you
Right.
know, and I wanted to do the things that dealt with the more subtle energetics. It was
Yeah.
fascinating, anyways. Our day jobs were acupuncturists, herbalists, right? Traditional Chinese medical people. So that was fascinating. But also the idea of like, when you spend a lot of time just working with the physical body, it kind of carries a lot of weight, so to speak. Sometimes, like for me, it's carrying too much weight. But okay, but it becomes very real. And I was interested in the idea of like, okay, what's it like to tap into this more subtle energetics and to feel those things just as real? That was very meaningful for me as a TCM, traditional Chinese medicine person, thinking about the body, but then thinking about those more subtle aspects of what make up a person. That was pretty fascinating for me. So I tried to get those practices. They're also like in the school of the Dalai Lama, which is kind of like my home base. Probably you'd say, Daniel, one of your home bases too.
Hmm.
Those practices are really emphasized, that they're very important to do because they have these very strong transformative effects because of transforming this subtle nervous system. Yeah.
So Eric, in for brevity's sake, how did you want to tie this into Jung's idea of the diamond?
Yeah, so we can maybe this is going to be a little two-parter for us. We only got a few minutes left for today. We got our time limits for the day. Um, but I think the diamond thing is interesting, and we're not the only people to make this observation. People have written whole books on this.
Yeah.
The archetype and the diamond thing are both interesting because people do see the connection to this kind of spiritual practice and things that Jung was talking about. So maybe we won't be able to do all of it, but we can do some of it. And maybe we'll do a little continuation for another short episode. But the idea is like, well, you brought up Tara, right? As a figure that you can resonate with as a kind of a spiritual meditative deity, but also like a force in the universe. So they're both internal and external in a way, and Jung is playing with that. But also they tend to have, when people look at this through the Jungian lens, they have like archetypal properties to them. So we haven't done full archetype. In a weird way, we started talking about the diamonds first. But Jung has this idea that there's all these archetypal images too. We've mentioned it here and there, but the archetypal image of the mother or the father or the female, the anima or the animus, or like the lover or a trickster or a power animal spirit of like a buffalo or, a bird or whatever. These are all archetypal things in Jungian thought because he got very interested in like anthropological stuff, traditional cultural attitudes, astrological things, and so he was interested in all these very primary images. And so when you talk about someone like Tara, to bring it back, you can think of her in different ways. You said a nurse and a healer, also the great mother is kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
connection with this. She has a maternal feeling. And I
Mm-hmm.
do a little Tara every day. Most people do, and I got some, there's different kind of versions of Tara that you can get connected with. But in any case, that's people would say, well, that's connecting to something from a Jungian point of view that's archetypal as a mother energy, right? And so that's kind of how it ends up connecting to Jung too. This idea that you have these archetypal figures in the Tibetan Tantra culture, if we're kind of taking that, but across the world, right? Where you're tapping into these figures that have like an archetypal resonance with them. So if we were to put on our Carl Jung hats, we would say, okay, what's happening here? We're tapping into the power of the archetype of like the mother when we try to imagine ourselves as Tara. All loving, all healing, all nurturing, willing to like, exude all of this love, compassion, and concern for like everything as being her child or something, like embodying that. And that's very interesting then. Like I know people who really connect to Tara who are, again, like practitioners, and you're like, well, that's their archetype because that's the one that they feel most deeply. And so in that sense, part of it's the idea that you'll find the archetype that has a resonance with you as you go into this, right? You tap into the one that really speaks to you. So maybe if you're really into the idea of like power and strength and perseverance, maybe you'll connect to that buffalo-headed Yamantaka. That might really speak to you, right? Has a very strong kind of power animal feeling to it, right? Has a shamanic feeling. You could feel really connected with that. That might be the one that might be your home base. It's likely that you'll do a number of these, right? When you're in this tradition, because you want to tap into the feelings of these different archetypal sources, being Jung, right? But then, the idea is also that you'll probably have ones that will resonate more, that you probably like, this is my home base. This is the one that I really feel. With the diamond, then it becomes like, well, isn't that kind of ending up a little bit like a spirit guide for you in the sense that you're trying to embody it, as you said, Daniel, or transform into it, right? But also there becomes the idea like it's not entirely just you. You also have connection to this outside force, whatever this means. This is obviously very tough when we're talking about Jung,
Mm.
right? But like that yiddam also in a way becomes not only what you're transforming into, but also kind of a spirit guide for you, right?
Right.
And this is, Jung in his active imagination parts would be like, I'm going to journey internally. I'm going to use my creative imagination to do this, and I'll tap into these inner figures, which in many ways Jung thought were, what are they? They're psychological on some level, but he also thought they transcended even his own psyche. They were things that were transcendent of himself too, that he was tapping into. And that's something for us to explore in future episodes more. But, really famously, he kind of connected to his inner spirit guide, who was a character called Philemon. And Philemon was like a wisdom figure, appeared to him like an older guy, but he also had part of what you were talking about, Daniel, features that were, if you want to say shamanic or whatever. He had wings, right, of like a kingfisher. So he wasn't entirely just a human figure. He was something that also embodied these symbolic elements that you were talking about before. And, however Jung thought about that, he had these wings. He could transcend the mundane, or he could go between the worlds, or whatever's going on there. And so, that was Jung's, again, very personal experience of this. Ultimately, he shared this in this text called the Red Book, right? And it becomes part of like what he personally experienced and what he was trying to share, right? And that has, again, a kind of like a yiddam like feeling to it on some level, right? It's a spirit guide. Um, and then maybe, again, it's interesting. We'll go a little further with him in future episodes, what he thought about the transformation process. But in a certain sense, you could identify with that Philemon, feel it personally as a spirit guide for you, and then also feel that kind of strange transcendent feeling that that figure is not just something that's a psychological thing inside of you, but it also is sort of like something out in the world as like a spiritual force too. And Jung's willing to go there ultimately, right? He was nervous about going there, but I think as he got to the end of his life, he got more and more sharing of this with patients and colleagues. And now, of course, we have his stuff now where we have access to all of that material. He was obviously really exploring what this meant. So there's some of the comparisons with the Daimon.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a little story.
Awesome.
So, I've hosted some retreats, some medicine retreats, of course, outside of this country in lands far, far away where that those situations are totally legal and totally culturally acceptable.
Yeah.
Um, and in one of these medicine ceremonies, I was assisting, and one of the participants, who himself was a veteran and had seen combat and was really working through some of his PTSD with various plant medicines, which, you know, are really great for that kind of trauma. So obviously in a controlled setting and with proper integration and so on and so forth. It's not just, we're not just ripping out in someone's backyard, taking a bunch of random things, hoping for the
Yeah.
best.
You're a real
Um,
advocate of like you do it in an authentic setting too, where you
do
have
it in an
all
authentic
the
setting
things
with
that
proper
like taps into
preparation.
the preparation and shamanic wisdom behind it and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, and assistance afterwards, is the key. If you look at the totality of someone's experience, these moments are few and far in between and can actually be quite transcendental if they are properly held and then that space is properly cultivated moving forward, much like anything else. You're given a great piece of advice. If you don't put it to use, it just, something that, falls off the wall. So, anyways, so you do this, you have the experience at night, and then the next morning you come back together as a group and you talk about your experiences the night before to kind of help the facilitators understand, how things went for you and then how to adjust for the and upcoming ceremonies and so on and so forth. So, one of the participants, this guy was a veteran, talked the next morning after a ceremony and said, he goes, Daniel, every time that I looked at you, I couldn't see your face. And I was like, well, what were you seeing? He's like, it's kind of weird, but I saw you as like this like bull with these horns and these like burning eyes. And he's like, and sometimes he's like, I know it was dark and I know that I was out of it. He's like, but I couldn't tell it was you. He's like, and it was kind of scary, actually. And so I showed him a picture of the one character that you were mentioning earlier, Yamantaka, and his eyes just got so big. He's like, how'd you know? And I said, no, not how did I know? How did you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the bigger question. How did
Yeah.
you know? So it goes to show that was one of those really deeply synchronistic moments
Yeah.
where that we have connections, karmic, whether you want to call them karmic or you want to call them uh, like a meritocracy, meaning you've done enough practice that this thing is in and around your existence, or maybe you are a manifestation of that thing. I'm not quite sure where one starts and the other one ends, but that other people can see it or they can feel it. And I've heard this a couple different times in some various settings, some with medicine and some with meditation only.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, to see that and to hear that and to feel that as it occurs, it's a really deep sense of like, that's cool.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
cool. That's cool. It
of
means
all the
like
things that somebody could have said, they said that. You know,
yeah,
like
that ain't that's more than a quinky dink.
yeah, it's far more than a
You
coinkydink.
didn't see it was a squirrel or as a dolphin.
Nope.
Nope. Yeah, it's very interesting. It kind of like it's complementary to everybody involved in the sense of like and then that divine figure too to be your presence. But
Yeah.
like he was in a headspace to see that. You
Yeah.
were in a headspace to manifest that. And then, the figure is also making itself present in the lives of the people who are get to benefit from it. So it's like
Yeah.
a triple whammy or something. It's quite interesting. Yeah, that one was always very interesting. We have a teacher you mentioned earlier, Lama Glenn H. Mullen, one of our beloved teachers, and he's like a real Yamantaka person.
Hmm.
He has that vibe to him. And I remember, you and I known each other for a long time. We met way back, like, I don't know, how long ago, 15 years ago or something. But I remember we were talking
Yeah.
about these things, and I was like trying to get a feel of like, if, this is something Daniel may want to do, and then what would be a thing that he would identify with. And we would be out. I remember we were out just grabbing some brunch or something.
Hmm.
And the Yamataka isn't my main practice, though I've done retreat on it. You know, I've been thinking maybe I should empower in it because I've done the retreat. But anyways, maybe I should do that again at some point. Because you can, if you've done a retreat, you can kind of do your own empowerment ritual. And I do two a month, right, for the retreats that are kind of close to my heart, the practices that are close to my heart. But anyways, we were out, we were having our brunch, and I was like, every once in a while I would imagine these horns appearing and they would be on fire or something. And you kind of had that vibe. You could tell I was doing that. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is Daniel's, right? This is going to be
Hmm.
one of the ones that's close to Daniel's heart. Though we might have multiple, obviously. But I
Yeah.
remember thinking, okay, this is something that has the feeling of the shamanic power, the shamanic transformative power, that's part of that particular figure. I was like, oh, that's a Daniel one. Hmm.
Hmm. I think, Eric, the other part about this that's cool, and then we'll wrap, is that like even though there are very clear images that are drawn and described, so the drawings come from the descriptions that are the texts, because drawings are subjective to artists and so on and so forth. It doesn't necessarily mean that the way that something is drawn or presented by a different artist means that that is the only way that that thing presents to you as the practitioner. So there might be some, kind of features that they want you to focus on in the practice because they're helpful for you and for your attention. But that you ultimately your sense of creativity and ownership of the practice is going to alter a not only the way that it appears, but B, the way in which that you connect with it based on its appearance that is an emanation of how you see it. You'll have a familiarity with it. And I think that personalization of this practice, of this medicine, really, is one that is very unique. And I don't even know if it's shared with many other traditions. If I'm thinking about, Christianity, there's so many arguments about, what Jesus looked like. And, you and I always talk about our Gnostic Jesus. And I like to say that my Gnostic Jesus is like a 6'4" Jamaican man with dreads. Like that's, who just chilling, smoking some weed, like likes to surf, like that's
Well,
it
I
because
mean,
it's chill.
that might be like the flexibility of that spiritual figure, whatever Jesus is, right? We can all
Yeah.
identify or connect with him in different ways. But for whatever reason, there's a flexibility to that. And people saw all kinds of different
Yeah.
versions of that, right? That could be one that you could resonate with. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, like as far as Jung goes, he connected to this Gnostic philosopher inside of him, Philemon.
Mm-hmm.
He saw him as a Gnostic philosopher with these extraordinary feature of these wings and all of this other stuff that was sort of transcendent of the mundane, obviously, whatever way you want to look at that. But he was a Gnostic figure that he found inside of him, that became
Yeah.
this diamond for him,
Yeah.
right? And like, yeah, I don't, yeah, there's something about that, and then that's very personal, obviously, but also like it's not personal in a way too, because he's a Gnostic figure. It's not like he's not also like tapping into something, Philemon and Jung both tapping into something that's transcendent of just maybe a smaller kind of identity of himself. He was tapping into
Mm-hmm.
something that was bigger.
Mm-hmm.
It's trippy.
It is trippy.
It's very trippy. But
Very
anyways,
trippy.
that's kind of the Jung connection, and we can take this forward as we go in different ways.
Yeah.
But there is one, and we're not the only
Yep.
people to point it out. But I think we had a really good conversation exploring it. So
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too.
yeah,
Good work, my friend. Thank you.
thank you, Daniel.
Audience, thank you for tuning in. As do all the things everybody asks you to do, right? Like, comment, subscribe, share an episode with a friend, leave a review. Everything helps out, so this is a labor of love. We do enjoy doing this. We love to hear from everybody. So please send us an email if you'd like to, talking shit or giving compliments or just, whatever. Ginandtantra@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram at the Gin and Tantra podcast, ginandtantra.com coming very soon, Substack coming very soon. So be on the lookout for a little bit more from us. And we appreciate everybody. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys at the next one. Peace.